Hello and good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. I am Tony Lynch. You guys know who it is. I am the host, and as always, we're doing daily live streams for you guys. And I have an amazing guest for you guys. She's been patient with me this morning. Tony was running a little bit late, so blame me. But we're gonna move through it. We're gonna move through it and everything. So now, before we get started, if this is your first time tuning in, do me a favor, head over to that YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification, so you'll be notified every time that we drop an episode. And before I bring my guests up here, I want to notify you that this is for educational purposes only. So you guys, do me a huge favor while I bring up my next guest. Help me welcome Dr. Annette Atthy. Dr. Annette, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing good.
Amazing. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here and to be talking about grief. I know we just briefly met and talked earlier this week, and grief literacy is such a huge thing. And so I am always happy to step on a platform and talk about how we can change that.
You know, we was talking, I told you this is my jam. I love talking about it, but I love telling people about, showcasing other people's journeys and having such an amazing conversation, because that's what we did last time. So I expect nothing less out of this. Had a blast talking with you when we first met. And so now, before we get started, tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Okay. So my name is Dr. Annette Athy. I have been in the mental health field for over 20 years, working with children and families. My specialty is children and play therapy. When I was doing mental health counseling, that was my specialty. If you're familiar with play therapy, what that is a room with specially selected toys, because children don't have the words to communicate what they are feeling and what they're going through. And so they use the toys as their mode of communication. And I think for parents, oftentimes we kind of almost downplay what play is and the importance of play. And I think it's so crucial, especially when we're talking about grief conversations, because our kids are going to play out what they've experienced, what they felt, what they saw. And oftentimes, especially in our younger kids, it's repetitive play. They're going to do the same thing over and over. And so I have had the opportunity to work in many different platforms when it comes to grief. And I think it's an odd thing to say that I have a passion for grief, but at the same time, it's definitely a passion of mine. I really get fired up when we're talking about this topic, because I just think it's a conversation that many households are missing. And it starts with the conversation of the goldfish died. And instead of saying the goldfish died, as the parent, we panic, we run out to the pet store and we just replace the goldfish because we don't want to have the talk.
Right.
And so I think that just applies in so many ways. And so over the last couple of years, I actually retired my counseling license to do full-time grief coaching. I'm located here in Kansas, but I do a lot of virtual work. And by being a coach now instead of a counselor, I'm actually able to work with people worldwide, which is really exciting to me. And I get rid of the insurance limitations. And so I can really help families. I think oftentimes insurance has their idea of this is what helps based on their research versus what I know about people. Yeah. And so I can really get in, because it's important to me. I'm not looking for lifelong clients. I am looking for, how can I give you the most relief, the fastest, with the best tools that are not only going to help you as a parent, but are going to help your children. Right. And I think that's so important. That, the day is already full enough. And if you're now a single parent or you're dealing with your own grief, which is causing you to not get out of bed in the morning, why make things harder if we don't have to?
Very true. Very true. And you said two things. The first one, you know, when we talk about grief, I told you I love everything about it. So to meet another fellow colleague that's in love with this thing called grief is truly amazing. I love I love everything about it. The messiness. We've talked about this. I know people will probably listen like, y'all are strange. And I'm okay with that. I'm
Right.
definitely okay with that. And
Yeah.
for the fact that you work with kids, is truly amazing. Because I'm used to working with men. So, I'm used to working with older men. And I find it truly intriguing to understand, or try to find someone who understands how a child's minds work around grief.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. There needs to be more talk around it, especially when it comes down to young children and things
Mhm.
like that. I just have a hard time with them because I end up picking with them more than anything else. I never get anything done. And then they tell all their friends about me. Next thing we have to fight in the streets because they be like, you know what? You took my lollipop, Tony. I'm like, yeah, and I do it again. So I never get anything done. I never get anything done. So I love everything about that. I really do. Now, my question would be, how did you get into this field?
So, life, I think, puts you on the path that you're supposed to be on.
Mhm.
And through the years, through childhood, I lost several significant people. Some were expected, some were unexpected. And I guess for me, maybe different than other kids, I always looked at things from this quality over quantity.
Mm,
And so, very early on, I didn't understand why people would want to drag life on when you're suffering and in pain. And I just witnessed so many people who were in such critical pain, overwhelming pain, but they were holding on for the loved ones around them.
right.
And I couldn't wrap my head around why somebody would do that. And again, losing several loved ones, I think when we lose a grandparent, it's hard, but
Mhm.
there's some expectedness in that because, of course, when we're in middle school, we see our grandparents as so old. Now that I'm in my 40s, I don't necessarily see those grandparent ages as so old. They're not so far away.
Right. Oof, yeah,
Yeah,
understood.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the kind of defining moment for me was when I was 19. I was a freshman in college. Um, you know, experiencing the world, doing life on my own, attempting to adult, and very shortly into my first semester, my aunt, who is my birthday twin,
Mhm.
had gone in for a medical procedure and had some complications and died.
Wow.
And she had three sons who at the time were 12, 9, and 6. And I used to babysit for the boys. I spent a lot of time there. If there was any medical emergency, this was my aunt that came over and helped take care of me because my mom was not a fan of blood. Um,
Mhm.
and so I was really close with this aunt. And I remember receiving the call, like I could paint the picture, tell you the room where I was standing. It was definitely one of those defining moments, finding out, because
Yeah.
it was the first loss that seemed out of order. It didn't make sense as to like everything is fine and now everything is not fine. But in coming home from college to be part of the funeral and the days afterwards, I became really aware. And of course, at 19, you're still considered a child. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily get to have an adult opinion or say about what's happening in your family. And so I was more of an observer, but standing back, listening to people talk to the boys, listening to the messages that they were hearing. We lived in a very small community, and of course, the village was strong. The village was ready to support the family through this tragic situation. But most of the care and support was going to my uncle.
Right.
You know, it was how can we help you? And of course, everybody shows up with 27 lasagnas and the redundant how can we help, and yet he was numb and didn't know how to answer. He didn't know what kind of help he needed. You know, this was completely foreign territory for him.
Right.
But the message I kept hearing the boys receive was, be strong for your dad. Be strong for your dad. And it just kept striking me every time, because I thought, well, what about their grief? Like, they just lost their mom.
Mm-hmm.
They're the person who was their Cub Scout leader, the person who, made sure that they were getting to piano lessons or sports, or, made sure they had their favorite meal or got their special birthday cake or whatever it was. Like, that has ended now. And yet nobody was attending to them and their grief. It was just kind of, it's almost unspoken. Suck it up. We got to take care of dad now. He's struggling. And in a very fast amount of time, the pictures were removed from the wall. Her clothes were taken out of the closet. It was almost as if there was this belief that if we remove her memory from the house, the pain will go away and we'll all just move on and it'll be okay.
Right.
And I just remember being so struck in that as I watched it unfold. And again, I was the observer. What was I supposed to do at 19 to change that narrative?
Understand. And like I said, you and I, we talked about this because I was that guy that thought that, you know what I'm saying, when my son passed away, I held on to his things for probably about 2 weeks, right? His mother, although we lived in two different places, all of my son's stuff was out of her house within the like 2 days after he passed. And, because I went over there and I helped her. And I thought, like, okay, if I do this, then, I just saw her do it. She was a tad bit older than me, so I figured, she knows what she's doing. I should do the same thing. Although I did keep a few of the things, and I don't think they really understand that it's not going to go anywhere just because we've removed these things, and doesn't mean that it's going to stop what's coming. Because it didn't. It definitely didn't. And I think that by me being a men's grief coach, I love hearing the fact that people are focusing on the men. It disturbs me when I hear that they've neglected the children.
Yeah.
Because again, being someone who's in the grief field, I look at things from a 360 point of view. And I'm going, no, someone should be there to take care of the children, and someone should be there to take care of the men as well, especially after loss of a spouse, because it is so common to neglect, and it is very common to neglect the men and go and focus on other people like the children, things like that. And I go, no, you got to work on everyone.
Right.
And then when you're looking at the children, you have to look at the age variations. And what is the commonality across the board of how they're going to receive what just happened?
Mm-hmm.
And having somebody there who understands it is key to it. Now, when it comes down to working with children, I'm still learning, but I'm a big kid myself, so I tend to pick fights with them. And I love seeing them laugh and things like that. Although, um, I just don't know how to help them in depth when it comes down to it, right? And so that's why I'm always looking for other people. I'm like, hey, I got some children. I'm doing my best by keeping them laughing and things like that, but they're hurting.
Yeah.
And I know that there's people out there that are better at it than myself, like you. And so you would be the one that, hey, and I have some children. Can you work with them,
Right.
please?
Absolutely.
I'm quick to do that. I'm very quick to do that because I understand my lane. I do.
Mhm.
Um,
But
and
and I think there's so many complexities. Whether we're
right,
talking about
right,
men and women's grief, whether we're talking about children, and children kind of get separated into three different categories. We have the
mhm,
the younger ones who completely do not understand the permanency of grief, and so you're kind of on repeat, this broken record. You then have kind of that preteen, middle school age that kind of get it, but they still kind of don't. They're kind of
yeah,
stuck in that middle. And then you
mhm,
have the teens that they get it, and yet there's still some very childlike understanding
mm,
because they're not looking ahead to the future. But
right,
I do want to kind of go back to what you were saying about how with your son you packed things up because you kind of followed the example of what you
mhm,
thought was how to handle it. And I think if parents could walk away from our talk today, I would absolutely want them to hear, like, what you did in the moment, you did the best that you could.
right,
And I think that's so important because as parents we carry enough grief about enough, or grief and guilt about enough other things, that I just want to really make that clear that we do the best that we can with the information we have, and sometimes we don't learn to do better until something like this has happened.
right. But
And
and it took me a long time to understand it as well, right? It
yeah.
really did. And it took healing, it took growing, and walking through the process of being not just a student of grief, but also becoming a teacher when I needed to be,
Mhm.
and that's what helped me understand. Now, we talked about this before. Not everybody's going to get into the spiel,
Yeah.
right? And the biggest mistake that I think that people make is that they tend to rush the process after loss. We tend to mimic what we see other people do. Like I said, I am guilty of it myself. I have done it. I have done it, and I see other people doing it as well. And that's why I speak so passionately about it now, because having to go through it and having a more in-depth understanding of it, I tell people, no, take your time. Well,
Yeah.
such and such, I know that's what they did, but you don't necessarily have to do that. And
Yeah.
so I do come from that place because there can be a lot of guilt attached to the removal of those things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's where I am.
And I
That's
think,
what I learned.
again, I think in the removal of that, if you look at child development,
Hmm.
they're they're very tangible items. So
Hmm.
to the child, those items represent the person they love.
Right.
As we get older, we realize, no, the memories and the love are inside of us. But very much when we're younger, it's about, this special blanket or this special bear that came from
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
or um, one of the things my youngest daughter did was wore her dad's slippers around for a while. You know,
Right.
would slippers have been on my list of things to keep around for her? No, probably not. But there was comfort in that item for her.
Mm.
And so she wore them around. And so again, I think it's so important that parents are having conversations with their kids. What items are important to you? What things have meaning to you? What would you want to keep?
Right.
And knowing that sometimes kids' personalities, they believe too, like, oh, if we get rid of it, I'll feel better.
Right.
And so then they don't want to keep anything. And so I'd often encourage parents, like, if you know there's a few things that you think your child might want in the future, just go ahead and create a memory box, put it away in the garage, but have it so that when they get older, they can go back into that box. Doesn't mean they'll keep them forever,
Right.
but at least they'll have the opportunity if they want to.
I love that. I love that. I love the fact that you said memory box, because I think that's one of the things that, as a man, now I'm only speaking from the part of being a man, right? Because our memories is something that we protect. So having physical things as a male, we often look at those things and go, if you knew that I had this, there's a possibility that you can use it and take it and hurt me with it. So and and that, again, that's coming from a place of being a man. Not only did I have it happen to me, but it was a place, having it up here is a place that I could protect myself. Because if you don't know, then you can't hurt me.
Yeah.
And life teaches us these things. Now,
Absolutely.
You said something, and I want to touch on this a little bit.
Okay.
About your daughter taking her father's slippers. So that leads me, again, I'm a student of this thing, and I pay attention. And that means that you lost your husband.
Well, so there's a kind of a twist to our story.
Mm-hmm.
So my husband and I have 3 kids. And then my youngest, I actually had as a surrogate pregnancy for my dad and his husband.
Okay.
And so it's my dad who passed away, which he was raising my youngest. So if you can follow that.
No, I followed. I just wanted people to understand. So when you said that, you see, because I'm like, well, that could be misconstrued. You and I talked about it and stuff. And so I just wanted to elaborate on it so the audience can understand.
Absolutely. And I think that is actually what kind of hugely fueled this passion that was already there, because I kept finding myself on the grief path and helping people.
Right.
But when my dad died 9 years ago, and it was suddenly and unexpected, he had gone in for an outpatient procedure, came home, everything was fine. We actually had gone over there, the kids and I, we had supper with him, talked, laughed, everything was great. Hugs and kisses, we left. My youngest, who, at the time, I was considered like the aunt. And so she lived with her 2 dads.
Mm-hmm.
They put her in bed. So she had gone to bed. We came back home, my older 3 kids and myself. We were home for about 15, 20 minutes, and I get a phone call. And it's from my dad's cell phone. And I think in that moment, my brain very much was protecting me, because who I heard on the other line was my dad, except for it wasn't my dad, it was his husband. Okay. And he said, something's happened. You need to hurry up and get over here. And immediately, okay, and told my husband, like, I gotta go. Dad just called, not sure what happened. I'll message you once I see what's going on. And we're about 15 minutes apart. So I drove over there very consciously of, okay, if I drive too fast, I may cause an accident, and that's going to make things worse. So trying to calm myself with this huge looming, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on. But all that I did know was we had just had supper together. Everything was fine. Like, my brain very much, and I can't stress this enough, was protecting me, because
Right.
nowhere in my mind was I like, oh, Dad just had surgery today. He might be having some sort of complication. Like, that did not register for me at all.
Right.
And so I show up there and I pull into the cul-de-sac, and here is the fire department, the police department, the EMS, and I go up to the door, and a police officer is blocking the door, so they won't let me in the door. And my dad's husband is on the porch, and he says, it's bad, they're doing CPR. And I was like, what? Like, this instant shockwave of what just, like, it's been 20 minutes. Like, by this time with me driving, it's been like 30 minutes. Like, what just happened?
Right.
It turns out that he had a pulmonary embolism. So he was sitting in his chair, everything was fine. And then because of the blood clot, he instantly went into arrest. They did CPR, and I don't know about your state, but in the state of Kansas, when you die at home, your house is considered a crime scene. Right. Until they come in and determine otherwise. So we couldn't get into him. They blocked the door and kept us out while they're working on him. Mm-hmm. And I kept pleading with the police, like, just let me in there. Like, if he can hear me, he won't leave. He'll come back. Like, he'll take a breath. Like, right. Just let me in there. Let me talk to him. And of course, they're like, no, you can't get in the way of the EMS. No, you're not allowed in there. Meanwhile, my youngest, who was 2.5 at the time, her one dad is on the floor getting CPR. Other dad is outside with me, and she's upstairs in her crib sleeping. And so she went to bed. All these things are happening in the living room. And in a matter of hours, her life was never going to be the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a bit to take in right there.
Yeah.
And it just proves what we always say now. Like, make sure that you create those memories with people, because tomorrow's not promised, or in a lot of cases, that next moment is not promised.
Yeah,
it's definitely not promised. And I think that's what makes you very awesome, because now you see everything from the 360 point of view, and you're already thinking about the child, right? You're already looking at things from that sudden impact. And that is very sudden impact. I know. Yeah. In most cases like this, we can talk about anticipatory grief, right? Yep. We know that things in anticipatory grief, we're already assuming, the worst in some cases. I've been that route where I've had it reversed on me too, right? When my share this story, when my father passed away from congestive heart failure, I get the call. My dad's in the hospital. I fly out from Colorado. I go there. He's, I'm there for probably about a week or so. He's in the hospital. So every day we're up at the hospital expecting that he's going to pass away soon. Mm-hmm. So it comes time, by me being the oldest, I take care of everything. I do a DNR, do not resuscitate, because, I was like, I don't want him to be in a vegetative state. And I leave, and as soon as I left that Sunday, I get the call Sunday night that he wakes up from his coma. He wakes up, right? So I'm talking to him now, saying, he's like, heard you was here. I was like, yeah. And so now, my younger brother, they're like, hey, we're going to come out there, come visit you, right? And I'm talking to him every day. And every day I'm talking to him. I'm excited. I'm truly excited, because we went from expecting him to pass away to him waking up and saying, we're going to come out to Colorado to come see you, him and my younger brother.
Right.
I get the call Sunday, this is a week apart. I get the call next Sunday after I talked with him that morning. My sister calls me that evening and said that he had just passed away.
Wow.
So I've seen that part right there. And I was just like, hold on, what do you mean? I was just talking to Dad this morning and everything. She goes, I know. He slipped back into a coma. I said, no, you don't understand. I said, baby girl, I was just there. And they said that he was going to pass away. And that was the reason why I came down there, because, I wanted to make sure that I was there to see him before all of this happened. And he got up.
Right.
I said, now you're telling me, I just talked to him. You're telling me that he's gone. I didn't know how to feel about that. Right. And so there was a lot of that, to where it went from anticipatory to sudden. And I was just like, whoa, that wasn't supposed to happen. That's my first thing. And I'm just like you, my mind wanted, well, I guess before I make that statement, I want to ask a question. Do you think in these situations where we deal with medical mishaps, I like to call them, that our brain do protects us, do try to protect us? I know in many situations we're dealing with trauma, and we can go into survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
I find that I had to force myself to remember things.
Yeah.
My brain had blocked it out in order to protect me from the things that had happened to me.
Absolutely.
Do you find that to be a common thing?
Absolutely. So I don't know if you're familiar with Deb Dana and Stephen Porges, but they talk about the polyvagal system, which is essentially your nervous system that runs from the base of your brain all the way down to your stomach. And it's constantly running in the background. And that nervous system is constantly looking for cues of safety and threats of danger. All day long, it is constantly scanning. And when everything is online and going smoothly, our digestion is working, our heart rate is stable, our blood pressure is stable. All of those things are working to keep our nervous system calm. But the second that when it's scanning, it starts to see something that doesn't feel right, doesn't look right, doesn't sound right, the body registers that as a threat of danger. And so it kind of sends off these alarms of danger, danger, danger. But the nervous system can't tell if it's a real or a perceived threat. It can't tell if it's a tiger in the middle of Walmart, or you're walking in the dark parking garage and you're looking behind you and thinking somebody might be there. It doesn't know what's a real threat and what's a perceived threat. So when we get into these kind of crisis situations where things were fine and then they weren't fine, like with your dad, anticipating, your nervous system was activated, and it was definitely sensing the danger of all of these things getting ready to happen. And then your nervous system relaxed because he made this miraculous recovery. He looked good. And it wasn't just for an hour or two, it was days.
Right.
So your nervous system had really relaxed, okay, we're out of the woods, we're good. And so to get an immediate call like that, where everything flips the script, it changes, the nervous system completely reacts. It completely is sounding the alarms like danger, danger, danger. And suddenly the body is only sending blood flow, just like in a trauma medical event. It's only sending blood flow to the major organs. It's no longer sending blood flow to the neck up. So of course you can't remember. Of course you can't remember the simplest things or make the decisions, because your body is in shutdown survival mode. It's in the let's give our body a fighting chance. So your blood is going to your hands and your feet, so you can either fight to get out of the situation, or you can run away. But it's no longer accessing those higher levels of thinking and thought processes. And to me, this is some of those where grief illiteracy kind of fails us, is we're not necessarily talking about that scenario when it comes to grief. And I think it's so crucial for people to understand why we do what we do in the midst of grief. Your body is triggered to protect itself. So the television goes on, the blood flow is going to the major organs, and that's why when people start saying, what can I do to help? What do you need? And you can't think of a single thing. There's 6,000 things to do, but you can't think of a single thing that you could ask for help.
I love that, because as you were speaking, I started thinking to myself, like, this is what he called brain fog.
Yeah.
Or grief fog, right? Grief brain. There's different terminologies for it.
Yeah.
And so I associated it with it. I was like, that's exactly what that is. And I don't think people understood. And I love the way that you just explained that, because now people can have a really in-depth conversation, because being someone who is a grief coach, we often talk about it depending on how far you take your education, right?
Right.
And how much are you willing to go out and learn about the diversity of grief, and how it does show up. And I remember a friend of mine said, when we grieve from the neck down, right? Because the brain automatically wants to shut off.
Yeah.
And it wants to fill your mind. Like it will create illusions, from what I found. And I don't know if it's like that with everyone, but I know for me, it was one of those. I had experienced so much that when I did experience one of my toughest losses, well, actually, I'll talk about my last loss. My mother, she passed away from a brain aneurysm. She had a major stroke. And so when she passed away, I was there to watch her take her last breath. And I would say probably about maybe 6 months after, I was having a hard time remembering a lot of the other things that had happened. So I had 2 years after my son passed away, when my mother passed away, and I couldn't tell you what I did.
Yeah.
I was on automatic. Like, I knew to go to work out, eat, and so I went to work and came home. I hardly ever came. I do remember I hardly ever came out the house. I do. I had everything there. I mean, I didn't have cable, so I had a bunch of DVDs, etc. I knew if I needed to go to the store, I had a straight shot to the store. I knew what I wanted. I go in there and get it. Didn't want to talk to nobody. Come back home. I knew that was my routine, and so I stuck with it, thinking it was totally normal. Things like that. When my mother passed away, it just kind of added another element to it. Reaching out to my sister and things like that was non-existent. And and I just came back, and it was, it wasn't until I would say 9 months after my mother passed away, because after my mother passed away, I said, you know what, no more of this. I'm not going to stay in one spot. So I ended up making bad decisions. Of course, I talk about the grieving process from a man's perspective, right? What I'm saying? It was messy, because I had the first 2 years of being on automatic. Couldn't tell you what I did. Conversations, although I know that I had them, people talk about it, and I'm like, I don't even remember that.
Yeah.
And then we talk about the next one, the anticipatory with my mother. I just remember the pain that I was in, and then I remember making some really bad decisions, lost everything, went to South Dakota, came back, and from there I remember just this fight in me. Just this really, really strong fight. Like, I'm not going to let this whoop me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let this whoop me. Only to get whooped. I got whooped pretty good. Like, this thing bounced me around, and I didn't even know it. I was like, oh, this is what we doing? Oh, no, you don't understand. I'm about to explore building a business. I'm about to do this, because I just lost my other company, my personal training company. I lost all the equipment, I lost my place and everything. And I was just like, no, this ain't gonna whoop me. And I just remember coming back and I was just like, oh, I'm ready to rock and roll because I never ran from anything. And this wasn't going to be no exception.
Yeah.
Good morning, Rachel. Thank you for tuning in. Please, we're talking with Dr. Annette, and she's a child loss specialist. She's a grief coach for children, a child expert. And so we're talking about some of those things. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions for her, please put them in the comment section. I know you're just now tuning in, so if you need to go back and check out the full episode, go back there and check it out and everything. Thank you again. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later and everything. But yeah, got a lot of amazing things coming up. So, Dr. Annette, I find that it did take me a long time to figure out what was going on and to realize it didn't dawn on me until I was making that decision to not be here anymore.
Yeah.
And I look back on it now and I see the sequence of events. But there was something about it. There was something about that moment and moving forward and growing to where I would have these very vague memories of everything, like from the course of my whole entire life, right? Of things that my brain had tried to hide from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to force myself. I remember sitting there and saying, no, I want to remember. And you're not going to keep lying to me. So I realized that my brain was protecting me, but by lying to me. I said, no, I need to go back in. So I would force myself to be honest about those memories. And what I find that what it was doing, it was punching down those walls, those images, those illusions. And that's when I was like, okay, this is starting to make sense now. Not saying that everybody's going to do that. Mine was just a very, very special journey for me.
Yeah, and I think so much of, that numbness that follows grief, right after the death, that numbness helps us survive. It helps us keep walking through because, let's be honest, the business part of dying, if you're the one in charge of the estate or making the decisions, whether you're the executor of the will or the one making the medical decisions, there's a lot of decision making that goes into what happens after you die. Yeah. Like, for instance, my dad, he was on the floor. They were doing CPR for 45 minutes, attempting to bring him back, and he wasn't coming back. And I remember they finally let us come back in, and I think this is why the path that I took prepared me for those moments, is I was able to be the calm person in the crisis. I was able to make the logical decisions, but I'll never forget standing there and the EMS looking at my dad's husband and myself and saying, we've been working on him for 45 minutes. He hasn't come back. We can stop CPR now, or we can go ahead and put him on some medications, transport him to the hospital where they have more equipment, which was like 15, 20 minutes away, and see if we can revive him that way. And my dad's husband doesn't do well in crisis situations. Mm-hmm. And he looked at me and, it was kind of deer in the headlights. He didn't know how to answer. And obviously, the last thing I wanted to say was go ahead and let him go, because my dad was my best friend. I wanted him here. Like, the idea of what life would look like without him. We talked every single day. We would text in the middle of the night. Like, we just had such a super close relationship. I just had never envisioned that we would get to the day where he wasn't there.
Right.
But in that moment, I was so thankful that he and I, for years, had many conversations about, should things ever change or progress, if, with a health issue, or, if decisions have to be made. I don't want to be a vegetable. I don't want to be on life support. Like, it was very clear. I knew exactly what he wanted. So without hesitation, I was able to say, after an hour, there's no way his brain functioning is coming back to the same capacity.
Right.
He wouldn't want this life. Again, it kind of goes back to what I said in the beginning, that quality over quantity. He would have wanted quality of life, not quantity. He wouldn't have wanted 5 more years where he couldn't participate and be active with his grandkids and his daughters. And like, that just isn't the life that he would have wanted. And so it was hard, and yet very peaceful for me to say, please stop the CPR. Like, nothing is going to bring him back, and it's okay to stop. It's okay to let him go. And it takes me right back to that moment.
Yeah.
Where I knew I was giving permission for his life to end, and my life was never going to be the same. And his husband and my youngest daughter, my other 3 kids, because this is our grandparent they spent a lot of time with. We had lots of holiday baking cookies together, lots of rituals and traditions. Like, so many things were ending in that moment. And as an adult, I was looking forward at, here's all the things he's no longer going to be a part of in this physical world.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I was prepared to then turn around and look in the eyes of my 3 older children, who at that time were still elementary, middle school age. But the hardest one, of course, was my youngest daughter. She was 2.5. And so there wasn't that concept of, when somebody dies, they don't come back, that permanency piece.
Right.
And so every single day, because my dad was the full-time caretaker for her, she would wake up and she would go looking for him. Where's other daddy? Where's other daddy? And she would just look for him. And all the other adults would just break down, just heartbroken, when she would just continually say this over and over. And again, I fully believe that I didn't know I was training for this, but my training came in handy, because I knew exactly what she needed to hear. She needed to hear it in very simple, concrete terms. Daddy died. His heart stopped working. And she needed me to say that 25, 50 times a day. And let me tell you, it was gut-wrenching. It was heartbreaking to keep saying those words over and over, because it also was very alarming to my nervous system. Like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like, I'm in this state of shock. I can't believe it happened, but now I have to pull myself together in a very calm way to give her this news, because she doesn't understand what any of these words mean.
Right.
Yeah.
I got a question, right? Because I'm right there with you. And it's because you're coming from the place of being a daughter and a mother as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're having to take that in and having to calm yourself down, regulate your nervous system, and being able to articulate these things to, not just a 2-year-old, but the rest of your children as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, the one thing that I found that with me, and again, I can't speak for everyone, but I learned over a period of time, and it was something like you said, the path kind of chose me and kind of taught me how to do certain things, because after surviving over 40 some years in this world, it was like I learned, in order for me to survive, I had developed this ability to turn off my emotions. So because of the things I used to do, I realized that having an emotional reaction to things could get me killed.
Yeah.
So over time, I just learned how to just detach the emotional aspect of it. And I think that plays a vital role, in the flight or flight.
Yeah.
And I realized I used to do this all the time. Like, I would look at certain things like, okay, it's done. We got to keep moving, right?
Yeah.
And I never knew how to run from anything or anyone for that matter. So, I had that going for me. And so when I finally got older, I say in my, let's see, my son passed away. At like 42 is when my son passed away. Although I was looking at the situation for what it was, and I would mimic people, that had lost a child and things like that. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. But I do remember a very deep embedded pain. And like I said, that flight or flight would kick in. I was like, this is not going to whoop me. Right. And I didn't know how or what I was doing, which is how I got into this work. I didn't know what I was doing. I wanted to be surrounded by other men that knew, so I can learn, what I'm supposed to do. Right. Because I mean, I've never lost a child before. I've never lost a parent or a younger brother before. I never did any of these things. So I was like, well, uh, I want to be around other men who have gone through similar things, and that was the whole concept of how I got into working with men, because I realized the importance of surrounding myself with other men that had gone through similar things. That way, they knew how to support you, but I also learned that my path was individual, and so I was going to have to move and walk with this thing as I went along. And I want to ask, did was although that was a technique for me, how common is it for people to disassociate their emotion from the situation, or is that just one of those things that make us unique in those ways?
I definitely think that that's a survival tool. The grief, again, can be so intense, so heavy, so paralyzing, um, that our nervous system does anything it can to shove it in the box,
Mm-hmm.
shove it under the bed, not look at it, not think about it. Um, Oftentimes, and I see this quite often in teenagers, but even in adults, they start engaging in those more risky behaviors, not necessarily because they want to rebel or they want to be bad. It's really, they've numbed for so long, now they're they're looking for that sensory, am I alive?
Yeah.
Can I still feel? Because these feelings are so heavy, so complicated. And for kids, they pop in and out of their grief. And so they're not necessarily going to look like an adult who maybe doesn't get out of bed for weeks at a time. Kids kind of fluctuate throughout the day. So there may be a grief, I refer to them as grief storms, a grief storm that pops up in the morning. It moves on through. By the afternoon, they're back to playing with their friends, hanging out, doing what they do. And then maybe it's a couple days later when another grief storm pops up. It's not necessarily this continuous storm that stays around the same way that it does in adults. And
Right.
I don't think I really understood that. I had worked with a lot of children, um, and when I say this, I'm sure you will totally get it. Like, even though I had deep empathy for those who were in grief, I don't think I really understood grief until my dad died. Like, again, I lost a lot of people, and yet my day still kind of went on.
Mm-hmm.
But the day that my dad died, it was almost as if I had entered a whole new world and felt very untethered. Like, here's this pillar in my family who's no longer there. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
Well, now I'm at the top of the pillars. Like, what? I now have to guide the family. I know, like, there was just, and again, it was nothing that anybody said or did. It was just these things that made me aware, like, life is different.
Yeah.
And the number one way that showed up was within about 24 hours. I was like, you know what? I am no longer saying yes to stuff I don't want to do. And
Yes.
I no longer wanted to be the one to host all the family dinners or do all the work to take care of everybody else. And again, it very much came from a protection mode. Like, I feel like I'm running on empty. I can't give everything to everybody. And so life looked different. And those were just some of those immediate ways it showed up. Like, people pleasing was over. Like, I didn't care if you got mad or if you wanted me to do something and I didn't want to do it. I wasn't doing it. I was no longer, like, I was dragging my feet going to events because I didn't really want to go.
Right.
So I would wait till the last minute versus being on time or being early. There was just a lot of shifts in trying to figure out, how does this world work if the person that I relied on and would have called to help support me is no longer there.
Right. Understood. I want to add to that is, because you said something, about the process of grief. And I want to add to it because, when I didn't realize the grieving process. It was, although I, just like yourself, I had experienced multiple losses throughout my life. And I would have that empathy. I knew how to hold space with individuals before I even knew what that was. And again, disassociation, my emotions, so I wouldn't have an emotional reaction to things where it was like the thing that I was always capable of doing. And I knew how to keep my mouth shut for the most part. And although I talk about the loss of my parents, my younger brother and my son, I didn't really truly develop the understanding of grief until I realized I had lost myself.
Yeah.
Sometime after the loss of my mother. And it was a compilation of understanding these multitude of losses to where trying to fight, trying to survive, I realized I looked in the mirror one day and I was no longer who I was. And I was so used to being alone that it didn't bother me with being alone anymore. I was always in the world, and it always made me feel as if I was in the world maneuvering it on my own. Every time I could turn around, I don't remember a whole lot of time where I was with people for long periods of time. I didn't necessarily have anyone walking with me to my next destination. And because people would have their own places that they needed to go. And I never took things personal. I mean, there was times where I wanted to be like, wow, you said that you was going to stay with me. And I realized that my life was not, it was not necessarily equipped for other people because of how in their mind extreme that it was. Like, there was things that would happen that that was out of my control. Like whenever I would lose things, right? I would just go, okay, I'm gonna see this thing out. And I knew what it was going to do. It's strip me of everything, and I'm going to be homeless again. So now I have to start thinking 20 steps ahead. What is my next move? Because I can't stop this over here. So I'm have to figure out the next thing. So it wasn't until again some time after where I realized that I wasn't afraid. One, I wasn't afraid to die, and I wasn't afraid to take my life. And I think that was the scary. That's when I had that fear of, yes, there's something wrong, Tony. You're damaged, and I realized that I was no longer me. There was, I saw myself, but I was no longer me mentally,
Yeah.
emotionally, or spiritually. Physically, I was doing fine because I. Go ahead.
As I say, and I would, the word damaged, I would say that you weren't damaged. You were wearing the armor of all the battles you've been through.
Right. Okay. I like that too.
All
Okay.
those scars, because I mean, the weight of grief really is the price of love. Like,
Yes.
we had the grief because these were people we loved, people who touched us, people who changed our lives, who meant something to us. And I feel like, grief is one of those, obviously, I mean, it'd be great if we didn't have it, because it's so heavy and it's so messy and it affects us in so many ways. And yet I have a sense of gratitude about it.
Yes.
When I am having those moments where I'm feeling really heavy with grief, my dad's birthday is coming up on Monday, which is usually a hard time for me kind of in the weeks leading up. I just feel his absence. But I really look at it as an opportunity of, I'm so thankful I miss him, because that means he was significant. He meant something to me. He left his mark. There's a lot of things of who I am, how I carry myself, because of him.
I like that. I definitely like that because it shows your in-depth understanding of the process that comes along with it, and how you're able to pivot along the way as it begins to change, right? Because grief never goes anywhere. It changes, and sometimes people don't know how to change with it, you know what I'm saying, or pivot within it. And I think that's what makes you very unique, and all those other individuals out there doing amazing work in this field. We have learned, or I don't like to put myself in that category because I'm still a student of this thing, but you guys have learned to pivot and develop more education and deeper understanding of how to step with it. And I find that fascinating. Always find it fascinating. Like I said, there's people out there that are doing amazing things, and I always want to make sure I recognize those individuals, and also recognize myself as always a forever student of this.
And I think if we're all being honest, we're all forever students. We're all forever humaning and figuring out this journey.
I love that word, humaning.
Figuring it out. Like, it would be great if there was a manual that told us how to get through all this and what to expect and what's coming next, but there just isn't. So if we can kind of just look at it like, this is us having a human experience, and now grief is part of my experience, and what do I want to do with that? What do I want to make of that? How do I want that to show up in my life? And it doesn't have to be this curse or this burden or this thing that's haunting me in the background, because the reality is grief will wait for you. So even if you want to shove it in the box, shove it under the bed and ignore it, it'll wait for you. It won't necessarily show up when you want it to.
Ooh, I love it.
But it will show up. I like to use the analogy, you can be walking through the airport, your bags are packed, and what might happen is that suitcase might burst open, and your underwear and your socks and your pants are going to go all over the place. So You know,
Well,
do you want to do it unexpectedly, or do you want to prepare and be ready for
right.
what's coming? Because it will come.
Well, you said it. I know. Look, Rachel. I did the same thing. I got goosebumps
Oh.
because she pretty much told us that our grief is stalking us. Okay,
A
and
little
so I
bit.
was like, oh no, she did. She said our grief will wait for us. Like it's just patient, just waiting
Yeah,
back. Like,
it
soon
is,
as soon as
and
you sit down, I'm coming to get you. Okay.
it'll keep knocking on the door and being like, "Are you ready?" And
Yeah.
it'll give
Hey.
us opportunities, and we choose whether we want to open the door and let it in, or whether we shut the door and say, "Not today," and keep on ignoring it. And
Oh, she just pretty much told us our grief is stalking us. Okay, so y'all heard it first. So,
and
no.
I do, Tony. I want to go back to one of the things you had said about losing your son and then losing your mom. I think one of the things that's so important that, again, I just don't think it's talked about enough is that often what happens when we lose somebody and have grief is that when we lose the next person, and honestly, I'm not a big fan of lose when the next person dies, because we didn't lose them. We know what happened to them. We know where they are. They're no longer physically with us. But when that next person dies, the grief it's not just this single grief of losing your mom or this single grief of your son dying. It almost becomes this chain link that links up. Yeah. And so our one grief event links up to the next one, which links up to the next one. And so what happens over time, and again, we'll go back to that stalking grief, it gets more intense because it's waiting. And if you didn't address the first one, then it feels even more intense with the next one. And if that relationship was different, the role of the person who died in your life, if that relationship was different, it may even be more intense.
Right.
And so I think that's important. It's important for parents to understand about children, but even adults, all of your death losses will add up, and they're all going to come back to the surface, even though at this moment you might be attending your dad's funeral. It's all of the losses that came before that show up.
What was the sequence of events, right? And I kind of, now that when I look back on it and things like that, and I started to put the path together, it's going to sound strange when I say this, but life has a strange way of bringing a certain reality to you. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, because when my son was born, I went and had a procedure to where I couldn't have any more children, the vasectomy. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I lose my father. And then I lose my younger brother, which would have been the one to take on my bloodline. And then I lose my son, which had left me now to this day and age to where I am now the oldest and the last of my bloodline. Mm-hmm. So when I'm gone, it stops with me. And life just said, it stops with you. What are you going to do now? And although that is my reality, I do understand that once I'm gone, there'll be no one else. And I sit back and I laugh about it now, right? After coming to that realization, I said, I now know what the dinosaurs feel like. Mm. And now my sister hates that when I do this. And most people, if you're laughing right now, you get it. But most people that care about me, they're like, don't say that. I go, no, but it's the truth. So I have a way of looking at the truth and just going, life found a way to wipe out my bloodline. I now know what it's like to be almost extinct. Yeah. And then finding humor in that, right? So, and that's what I mean. And like you said, Grief had a strange way of stalking me and coming up and going, "Hey, you want to hear a joke?" And so I kind of use that humor, like, "Yeah, I want to hear a joke." Well, what has two legs, two eyes, but know what the dinosaurs feel like? You do. I know it's dark humor, but saying,
but
bear with me a little bit.
but but there's also, we kind of have to look at, like, this is how you see your truth of the situation.
Right.
And not everybody else has to understand that or get behind that idea.
Right.
But if that kind of gives you some empowerment and some fuel to keep working with the men that you're working and creating change in the world, then, dark humor is right where it's supposed to be.
Well, it's my
Because
way of helping.
I think it's relatable. I think
Right. And it's
people
my
who
way
have,
of helping those that care about me
yeah,
understand that I am okay.
yeah,
Right. You don't have to accept my life.
yep,
Right. But if you're going to walk with me, I want you to walk with it in the totality of the reality that I live in, and not sugarcoat it, but have fun with me. Right.
well, and there's power in authenticity. You know,
Right.
authenticity vibrates at the highest frequency. Like,
Yes.
that's what we're all wanting to achieve. We just don't know it. and and for other people, that walking in authenticity is scary. It activates their nervous system and they don't want to do it. Where for people like you and I, who have been through different things, had certain things stripped from us and vulnerabilities exposed, I don't know how to be any other way.
I'm
Uh,
right there.
this
Yes.
this is
Yeah.
me. This is how I show up. You're gonna get all of me, whether you see me in my office, whether you see me at Walmart, whether you see me at my kids' sporting events. Like, this is who I am, and I bring all of my version of the truth. I bring my empathy and understanding of your experience. And I also bring my realness, my pain, my how I've walked through this world.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a total package, and I don't pretend to be something else. I just can't. And again, I think that was kind of that defining moment at age
Mhm.
37 when my dad unexpectedly passed away. It was like that moment. It was like a lightning bolt. I was like, nope, this is who I am, and I can't be anybody else.
See, I'm right there. I'm right there, and I want to add a little bit to there.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest thing is that when we look at the reality of this world, and we can reflect and have that reality in our lives, we're not going to be here forever. I think those that are closest to us, those that love us and um, have been with us for quite some time, I think they have this impression of us being superheroes to them. Superheroes with an expiration date, right? But no one wants to talk about the expiration date. We often make plans for a future that may not happen. We've done this before, and then get disappointed when it does not come to light. I am a firm believer. It is not my job to lie to you about this world. But if you're going to walk with me, it is my job to teach you to be in a world without me. Allow me to do the work that I am called to do and enjoy the moments and the time that we have together. But know that I am preparing you to live in a world without me, because that is the reality that I live in. And I think as parents, we tend to do that with our children. We tend to make a false belief, have implement this false reality that we're going to be around forever for our children. And I was privileged enough to understand from my parents that they're not going to be here forever, and I'm going to have to figure this thing out. Now, can it hinder the way that you live your life? In some cases, yes. Or or it can inspire you to live your life to the best of your ability and to create moments and memories that can last a lifetime. But also live within the reality of, I want to leave you better than what I found you. To inspire those that come into this field to do better than me. Because I'm doing everything I can to get to the spot that is mine. I'm not competing with anyone. And trust me, I'm reaching back and I'm grabbing other people and bringing them with me because I think they deserve a spotlight. And there are people out there doing amazing things. And I think for people like yourself and other people out there doing this amazing work, you do belong on the front lines. You do deserve to have that limelight shine on you um and see where this thing can take you, right? Because we can't do it alone. But of course, this is my path. This is my path, and I choose to walk it in the best of my ability. And I want to encourage others to do the same. And that's why I do the things I do. And I think that's why you do the things that you do as well. Right. And so now, final thoughts. Final thoughts.
Um, it, we've covered so much.
Yes, we did.
Yes, and I honestly, I think we could talk for several more hours, several days.
Oh, we gotta, you ain't saying nothing but a word because I'll have you come back on. Don't you tempt me, okay? Because I'll do it.
No, well, I would love to. I would love to.
Yeah,
I do want to share just a little bit about my Grief Storm quiz, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a chance to take it?
I didn't get a chance to take it, but I am going to take it. But let's do it. I'm here for it.
Well, while I'm sharing a little bit about it, I don't know if you want to hop on to the site and take it real quick. It's only 7 questions. It's really short. It's located at griefstormquiz.com. That's griefstormquiz.com.
You know what? This is what we want to do.
The Grief Storm quiz really was created out of my 20 years of experience working with children and families and watching the patterns of grief in children. And although my quiz is specific to grief, really the insights from this quiz are about how does your child handle their emotions? How do they handle these big feelings, these grief storms that pop up? And like I mentioned earlier, for children, they pop in and out of their grief. And so I refer to them as grief storms because these storms roll in and sometimes they roll out as quickly as they came in. And I have found this example is probably the best analogy, and I think it applies to adults and children, is that if you think about a herd of cows, when a storm comes up, they see the storm, and the quiz is about your child, but you can absolutely fill it out multiple times for each of your kids. And for you as a parent, because I think it is important that you know what type of grief storm you are and your kids, because some storms kind of get along and co-regulate pretty well, and other storms kind of amplify each other. And if you decide to take the quiz and sign up for the follow-up emails, I go into depth to kind of talk about the quiz. So just to answer that parent question. So when we're talking about cows and storms, why this matters is that the storm pops up over the mountain and the cows see the storm and they run away from it. They run away from the storm. And what that means is they're running away from their feelings. The storm follows them. So the cows are believing the storm is chasing them and that somehow they're going to outrun the storm, which is not true. The storm always catches up with you.
Yeah.
And what that means is the cows are in the storm, in the chaos for much longer. However, with buffalo, when the storm pops up over the mountain, the buffalo see that same storm and say, I can run from it or I can run towards it. And if I run towards it, I'll be in the storm for less time. So taking those feelings and emotions and hitting that storm head on, addressing it, talking about it, they're actually in distress for a lot less time than the cows are.
Yeah.
And so why that applies here is, as parents, we want to take our kids' pain away. And sometimes we want to give them all this comfort and ways to numb themselves, whether that's food or treats or toys or avoiding the grief. But like I mentioned, that stalking grief for you. And so if we teach our kids to be cows and run from the grief, to be scared of the grief, that it's something to be feared, they actually stay in this grief for much longer. And it's actually more painful the longer we put it off. And so we want to teach our kids to be buffaloes, to really face the grief, to talk about the grief, to talk about, and even if the only words that come out of your mouth are, this really sucks. Sometimes that is the most therapeutic thing you can say to your kids, where they get it. Like, this sucks. We didn't want this. We didn't ask for this, but here it is.
Right.
And so with the Grief Storm quiz, what that is my 5 grief storm types are rain shower grief, which shows up for those kids who feel their emotions. They're probably able to label their emotions, talk about it. My oldest is a rain shower grief, and we like to say that she feels her emotions in her eyes. No matter what feeling she has, she's probably going to cry.
Yes.
And so we just normalize that. Like, that's just how she feels her feelings. They come out of her eyes. And
I'm looking at the results.
Okay. And so then there's thunderstorm grief. Thunderstorm grief is one that this grief storm, these grief behaviors might pop up, and it's almost like the child just wants your attention, wants you to notice, and then the storm is almost gone as quickly as it came up. So it doesn't require a lengthy conversation, but just a quick check-in. And then there's blizzard grief. And my blizzard grief kiddos, and adults for that matter, need a little more tending to, because they very much on the outside are going to give you that everything is fine, but on the inside, they are struggling. And they are waiting for you to initiate the conversation. And I think this is where oftentimes parents get misled, because they're ready and willing to have the conversation, but they're waiting for their kid to come to them.
Right.
And especially with the blizzard type kiddos, they're waiting for you to come to them. Because they don't want to make you cry. They don't want to upset you. They don't want you to worry about them, because they noticed you are already stressed, you're already overwhelmed. And so they're just going to keep it inside because they think they're protecting you.
Right.
And so the blizzard kids are kind of this unique cluster that absolutely need checked in on differently than the other grief storm types. Then there's tornado grief. Those storms often pop up with no warning, and they can be a little intense. So they can be words, but they might have some physical reactions. So they might be your kids who are throwing stuff, breaking stuff, but they are definitely trying to get your attention and saying, I can't manage these big feelings. They're too much right now. Right. And they need the safety and structure of the parent. And then the last grief storm type is a hurricane. And the hurricane types, you can kind of see it building over the week. You know something's off, something's coming, but you don't know what. And my hurricane kiddos tend to be the ones who are going to lash out on you.
Okay.
They're going to take out their grief on the parent or on friends or other family. It might be in a physical way, it might be emotionally, but again, they're so overwhelmed, they don't know how to manage these intense, chaotic feelings that have just come up. And so there are some specific ways with each of the grief storm types of how you can address and handle those. And that's how I work with parents, is we kind of dial in on what type of grief type your child is, what type are you, and then how do we help this? How do we see the storm coming so we can do some prevention, but also then how do you handle it in a way that your child can express themselves, but in a safe way, in a way that you provide this safety and structure for them.
I love that.
I'm curious, were you able to take it?
Oh yeah, I did, because I was doing it as you were speaking. And so again, I found out I am a rain shower grief. I'm the rain shower. So which, and since my son isn't here, I can't say how he grieved things. So I just did it from the perspective of being a parent. And I find that was interesting as you were speaking. I was like, wow, if you guys haven't already, go and take that quiz, y'all. It's really interesting. It's really interesting. And I love the fact that it did show, the rain shower grief is very quiet. And it got me down to a T, very quiet and compassionate. Yeah. Because, again, that comes from understanding how to hold space with individuals. And I realized that my story has no place in other people's grief journey. They're not here for my story. They're here for what I carry. Yeah. And there's something, once I understood that gift that I carried, that I now beat on every day just to craft it out into the world. And not now when I say beat on and things like that, I don't mean in a very aggressive way of trying to get it out. I mean, I'm constantly feeding it. I'm constantly beating on it to perfect it. Because it's who I am. It's what I carry. And if I'm not constantly beating on it, then it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Yeah. Right? It's like, people have heard me say this before. Grief to me is like an art form. It's a canvas that needs to be painted out. It's this beautiful thing once you can make sense of the colors that are being formulated within it. And so that's what I mean on it.
Yeah.
My gift needs to be fed. And it's a craft that needs to be perfected. It's like a blank. Well, it's like a piece of steel that needs to be beat on and formed and sharpened and carved and have all of these different things put on it to beautify it. And that's what I mean by it. So understanding that aspect, I totally saw that and I was like, oh, yeah, well, that makes perfect sense with me. So yeah.
and definitely, Tony, I think had you taken that years ago, it may not have shown up as rain shower grief.
Right.
It may have shown up as one of, maybe more tornado, hurricane, where it was these huge surges and you didn't know how to handle it. But because of the self-work, because of all the internal healing and, again, knocking at it, checking it out, really analyzing it from that 360 viewpoint and you wanting to understand it is what brought you to the rain shower grief, to really have that compassionate side for it's here for a reason. Obviously, there's not a single one of us that wouldn't change it. Like, if we had the choice, we'd go back and get rid of it because we'd much rather have our loved ones here in the physical world.
Right.
but we don't have that superpower. And so we have to take this, and we get to choose. We get to choose if this is the thing that we take a look at and we heal from, and we look at the lessons and the meaning of all of this. And it's either something that helps us or it's something that destroys us. But we have choice in that.
I like that. I definitely love that. And everyone, if you're just now tuning in, go back and check out the full episode. I had, Dr. Annette. She's freaking amazing. I did put the link to the quiz in the description of there. So go there and take that first. Figure out, either yourself or your child or both, and do that, and then read what it says. Right? Reach out to Dr. Annette. And guys, as we begin to wrap this up, Dr. Annette, how can people find you?
So my main grief coaching page is AnnetteAthy.com. So my first and last name. And on that page, I have links to my quiz. I have a link to a couple free guides that, number one, whether you're in the beginning stages of talking about a death, or maybe your kids are now older where you're talking about it differently. One of the first guides is kind of talking you through what terms to use, how to talk about it, how to speak about death and honoring your loved one. And then the other guide that comes with that is this: how do you answer the how can I help? And for some of us, that how can I help conversation might only come in the first few weeks after a death loss. But sometimes even 6 months, a year, a couple years down the road, we still have friends or family who are checking in on us. And this guide is intended for parents, and it has a template in you being able to actually get the help that's valuable to you. Yeah. So rather than having 27 lasagnas, you create a list of what kinds of things are your kids actually going to eat? What, is a gift card to McDonald's the better option because you're transporting between sporting events and you don't have time to cook? Or is it something that your husband always mowed the lawn and you're struggling to want to do it or have the time to do it? Is it helpful if a neighbor shows up and mows your lawn? Is it helpful that your kids maybe get picked up from school by the neighbor? Or maybe those are things you really want to do and you want somebody to come over and help you fold laundry because you're drowning in all the laundry and the solo parenting. Wow. There's so many ways that I think people do want to show up to help, but they're just as lost. They don't know what to offer you because they don't want to be intrusive. And again, like we talked about, that decision-making piece, when we're in survival mode, we can't always come up with on the spot, here's the help I need. And so when I created that template, it was very much from a place of you taking time to really gather your thoughts so that you could activate your village and get the help that you need. The other thing that I offer anybody who enters my world is a 20-minute consultation where we can talk about what supports I have that are free. I run an online Facebook group, Growing Up with Grief, which is intended for parents with children who are grieving. And so we can talk about, what episodes I might have in there that I can hook you up with some free resources. Or maybe that you've been struggling and you're ready for some one-on-one help. I do single sessions because I find that a lot of times we just sometimes need that check-in, that crisis session to, am I doing all that I can? Because again, I think parents are doing the best that they can with what they have, but they weren't prepared for these grief conversations. That wasn't something, or maybe I've worked with a lot of parents who lost their parents young and they knew it wasn't handled appropriately or emotionally when they were a child. And so they just want to do the right thing for their kids. And so sometimes just that one-off session is so helpful to just kind of lay out, okay, here's some things to expect. Here's some great ways to support yourself and your kids in the grief. Here's some starters to have the conversation. Maybe you have teenagers that are locking themselves in their room and don't want to talk to you. You know, I have some great easeful ways that you can kind of get inside of the mind of your teenager and have some check-ins that feel good to your teenager that aren't overwhelming, where they feel like, oh, here we go again, we're having another talk.
Right.
Yeah.
No, definitely understood.
Yeah. Again, all of those things are on my website, AnnetteAthy.com. And then definitely go take the quiz, check out what type of grief storm you are in, as well as take it from the perspective of your child, or you could invite your teenagers to, you know, have them fill out the quiz, see what they get. You know, that again, such a great point to get your kids talking about grief. What does it mean? Does this feel like you? You know, is this true? And that's at the griefstormquiz.com.
So I'm glad that I've taken it, because it definitely it describes where I am now and things like that. I do recommend people go and take that quiz, go and check her out. Again, her information is down below. And I really wish, I had more time, because we continue this, but I'm going to have Dr. Athy on again. And so you guys, I want to say, because I got people that schedule behind, so, jump on there and stuff like that. I do all this that you guys that know me, I joke around a lot and things like that. But we're going to consistently keep bringing these amazing people to you. You guys are going to be hearing a lot more from Dr. Annette. And so you guys keep an eye on for that. And Rachel, thank you for the big congrats. Yes, we did release the first magazine, which is amazing. It's subscription only. So if you want a copy, they are $5. We are taking Cash App and PayPal rate at the moment. We're working on some different pay forms and things like that. But $5 a month will get you a subscription. Now, but next month I am adding in a few more things, so keep your eye out on that. We're adding in a podcast section where I'm going to be recognizing those podcasts out there that are doing amazing things in the grief, trauma, and mental health field, etc. So guys, keep an eye out on for that one. We are going to be adding in an events page where we're going to be showcasing different events that are going on around the world. So no matter where you are, you guys can stay connected and go to those events. And then after talking with Dr. Annette, I am going to be adding in letters to a loved one, where if you have a letter that you've written to your loved one, you would like to see it put in a magazine, reach out to me. I would love to put it in there. And again, we have articles from people from around the world. Then this magazine is going to be actually really big. But also look in the resource and the contact page section. We do have those contact information up there for your convenience. We're making it easy for you to get the support that you need as you grieve. So we got something for everybody. And with that being said, Dr. Annette, thank you for being on today. Thank you for coming on and just having this amazing conversation with me. We're going to talk a lot more. For everyone else who has been tuning in, thank you for tuning in. If you want to go and check out the full episode, you guys already know. Head up to the YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell notification, and go in there and check out some past conversations that I've had with people. We got something, again, we got something for everyone. Everybody, I'm Tony Lynch. This is going to conclude this episode of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. We guys are going to see you in the next one. You guys have an amazing day. And as always, go and make memories with those people that you love, because we never know what tomorrow may bring. Okay? So, guys, have an awesome day. Peace.